Hello, hello. Welcome to episode 6 from the North. What's up, Edu?
So what are we gonna talk about
Um,
today, Head? What's going on in the north?
so we're just gonna be, doing a little commenting of everything that's been going on this week, and particularly just things that have been bugging us about the Trump. Oh my, see? Because it's been bothering us with the Biden administration that's behaving a lot like the Trump administration with several
I
things.
will say that not even behaving a lot, but if anything, making things worse.
So in this show, it's been a topic what happened in Afghanistan because we were enraged. So we don't have to go into that all the way, but we already know that Biden basically did what Trump was going to do in Afghanistan. Because all of a sudden Trump plans were worth following, even though he ran on the promise that everything Trump would be gone because this was an authoritarian populist that was bad for the institutions. Well, it turns out that the Biden administration actually likes a few of the aspects that Trump made popular for a president to do, such as not speaking to the press. So this week, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, went to the White House, to discuss the whole UK, US, Australia submarine deals. And Boris Johnson, who was at first compared to Trump, and he was supposed to be, a populist Trump like figure, did what you're supposed to do. He called on the press from his country. And then when it was Biden's turn to do it, he's like, bye, and kicks the press out. And it's not the first time he behaves this way.
That's such a red flag. That's such a red flag when a politician, especially in a position of power such as the freaking president of the United States, doesn't want to take questions from the press. According to him, to put everything on perspective, according to Biden, he doesn't take questions from the press because his like, I guess his networking team, his journalist publishing team, whatever, tells them not to do it. But here's the thing: you are the president of the United States. Literally no one can tell you what to do, especially when it comes to things as basic, as essential to a democracy as having that connection between the government and the press. So, seeing Biden taking the same.
Totally. We always talk about institutions here. The press is another institution. It's the fourth estate.
The fourth state, absolutely. And it's essential to a democracy that there's good communication between the press and the government. If that's not there, what are we doing? And speaking of following on Trump's traditions, if you guys remember, during the Trump administration, the TPS, which is a temporary permit for citizens of a specific country to work and live in the United States legally, the TPS that people from Haiti had since the last big earthquake back in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, Trump was the one to get rid of that. And we had a new president coming in on a campaign of being more humane, more open towards migrants. And what we're seeing now, the images that we're seeing from the border, is that that's not the case from, at least for people coming from Haiti. No, we also know that it's not the case from people coming anywhere. We've seen the scenes of Venezuelans trying to cross the border, Mexicans also trying to cross the border, but particularly
Even Cubans and Nicaraguans. It's crazy because these people, imagine like all they have to travel. Like a Cuban has to get to Mexico first, suffer through the terrible migration policies that AMLO is enforcing in Mexico because he's also having terrible policies for migrants, and then to make it to the US Mexico border and just be returned immediately, especially for a Haitian, a Venezuelan, a Cuban, and Nicaraguan that's running from danger.
So we ask ourselves, if it seems to us, at least from our perspective here from the north, that nothing really has changed that much from the Trump's migration policy to the Biden's era migration policies. So what's happening? Like, wasn't this supposed to be a big change? Wasn't that election supposed to be the big existential question of the United States of America? And why am I not seeing anything changing from across the border up here in Canada?
Just like speaking to the press, I want to read this tweet out from journalist Ashley Parker. She covers the White House. She's one of those, straight reporters. She's not doing editorials. She's not doing what we do here. She just covers the White House. And she tweeted this, Ashley Parker. Worth noting that Biden ran for office promising to restore democracy after 4 years of Trump. Side note, we always say in this show, that's why we supported Biden. Was he our candidate of choice, of our ultimate number one choice? No, we united with Biden to go against the threat, the authoritarian threat that Trump presented. Okay. But today it was the British leader, not the American one, who spotlighted a key tenet of a flourishing democracy: respect for a free press, by taking questions from his press corps. Now, Democrats always said someone like Boris Johnson was an authoritarian. Meanwhile, we're not talking about how Joe Biden is doing things that are not for a flourishing democracy. So it's time to call it out. Just because we voted for someone doesn't mean we just hang up the towel and then just continue to only look at the enemy and not call him out on what he's doing at the border, what he did in Afghanistan, and how he's treating the press, among other things.
You know what I think here? It seems to me that basically the Trump presidency kind of lowered the bar too much for what as president of the United States is supposed to be. So of course Biden coming in and being or acting as a normal president, quote unquote normal president, kind of makes him look like and seem like he's the big Democrat. He's like the hero of democracy in the United States. When in reality, what he's doing is not that much different from Trump. Maybe in the way that he's portraying himself. Of course, we don't have someone yelling at the press. We don't have someone...
we don't have someone sending mean tweets.
We don't have someone sending mean tweets. We don't have someone attacking migrants openly and directly through Twitter. But we have a president that when it comes to actually making the decisions, when it comes to actually doing stuff on the ground, it's not that much different from the Donald Trump era. So why was that election for, I wonder? What did we change?
And, we always say in this show, for us to call something out, it doesn't have to be just as bad as Trump. It doesn't have to be just as bad as Venezuela, because like we always say, there are levels. And I think, Edu, you hit the nail on the spot. Trump broke several democratic norms, and that was one of my biggest issues, that then the next guy can take advantage of that, because democracy can break down over a period of time, over a period of precedence. As a matter of fact, and we got to call it out too, Obama had a very contentious relationship with the press. No one remembers, but Obama actually tried banning Fox News from the White House. Now, at the time, the whole press corps and everyone came together, including opposition media like MSNBC, to say, Mr. President, this is not right. This is not democratic. Fox News needs to be in the White House press room. But little by little, people have become more tribalized, and they will not call out these things. But we for sure will. And we're going to talk about the issue in Haiti, because like we always say, another thing Biden is following from Trump is isolationist foreign policy. Now, we always tell you guys in the first world listening how this can affect you, bad things happening in other countries. Well, it's not just about border policy. It's about what's going on in Haiti. It's about what's going on in Venezuela. It's about what's going on in Nicaragua, and why these people are walking through countries to get to the US-Mexico border. And until those core issues are addressed, you will continue to see people desperately trying to reach the United States. So that's another way undemocratic regimes in other countries affect you.
Now, how could... and this is just me coming in with my anti-border propaganda for the show, but please allow me here. If you have a country like the United States, which is a country that right now, or for that matter, any country, any first world developed nation in the world, has a big problem of people not going back to work. There are tons and tons of businesses that are reopening. The economy is trying to go back on track. But
there are states, Edu, like Vermont, that are literally offering to pay people to move to Vermont to take jobs as teachers, as bartenders, as store clerks.
But what happens? What's causing this? It seems that through the pandemic, people realize that, hey, wait a second, I'm an essential worker, right? I'm making little bit more or close to minimum wage to be working here, to be out there, and I'm barely making $100 more of what people are making on unemployment insurance. And this is not to say that unemployment insurance is paying people too much, but on the contrary, that businesses and just the minimum wage overall don't want to really pay people what they deserve to be paid. So we have a big shortage of workforce in the United States. We have a massive amount of people at the border that are risking everything that they have, that are risking their lives to try to make a new life and work hard and live in the United States. It seems to me that the logical solution that a Democratic Party should have, and by Democratic Party I don't mean the Democrats and the Republicans, I mean any party that's that's a Democratic Party, should connect the dots and say, let's open the border. Let's give these people the jobs that we are so desperate for, to someone to take their places. So that's just my propaganda. I think there's...
Well, Edu and I agree on most things, but this is something we disagree on, and I think it's good from every once in a while for us to show our differences. Edu believes in open borders. I just believe in a more humane immigration policy.
But regardless, yes, if you believe in an open border, if you're a radical like me, or if you believe in a more humane border, if you're looking at what's happening in the border since Biden took office, there's not that much difference from what Trump was doing. So,
and I cannot, Edu, not call out the hypocrisy. Remember the scandal of kids in cages and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez going to the border and crying like this. And now all of a sudden, you know, we haven't even mentioned what we're talking about. Border Patrol agents on horseback seemingly whipping Haitians at the border. That's, I think, an image more extreme than anything we ever saw, at least in images printed in the press from the Trump administration.
And it's insane, but to scale it up a little bit more, so something else that's crazy is that the U.S. envoy to Haiti, I forgot his name, I don't know if you have it there, but he essentially quit. And he didn't quit because, or he wasn't fired, he wasn't replaced. He quit because, according to him, what the United States was supposed to be doing in Haiti with this new administration was to take a different direction, a more humane direction to the refugee crisis that we're seeing from Haiti. Remember, their president got killed like recently. They have one of the biggest earthquakes in recent memory also like a couple months ago. So this is a country that desperately needs, or people from this country desperately need, a second opportunity, a second shot to start over. And what we're seeing is, as Germania said, the police literally whipping migrants at the border. So obviously the envoy of the United States to Haiti quits over this, and the response of the Secretary of State is that he's being childish about this. So it kind of
I did not see that.
You did not see it? The response was, he's being childish. He could have done way more if he stated his position. That's like the official White House response to this. And it sounds to me, that's Trump policy making. That's not what the Biden policy making was supposed to be. So when you have someone taking a stand and calling you out and saying what you're doing is bad, therefore I'm quitting, instead of looking inwards, introspective, and saying, okay, la estamos cagando, what are we going to do? They say, oh, no, you know what? You're just a kid. You're immature. You can't play with us. We didn't want you anyway. That's the bully policy making. That's the Trump policy making. And we're seeing now that with the Biden administration. So this is concerning. This is the main topic of this episode. It's for you guys to understand that Biden is not doing as much as we would have liked him to do. And not only that, but every day he keeps looking more and more like the guy before him.
Ridiculously, Edu, then I don't know if you saw the White House response to the horrible images of Haitians being whipped was, oh, okay, well, we just banned Border Patrol riding horses.
That's not, that's like, it's, I don't even know what to say. I don't.
Basically admitting, yeah, because the visuals were awful. So let's not have those visuals anymore.
Oh, what we're seeing at the border is a government that's obviously incompetent, and I call them out as incompetent because one of the big things that they were trying to do, that they won the election to do, was to make the border more humane. This was not one of the proposals. This was one of the big proposals of last year's election in the United States. And what we're seeing is that we're seeing police just with whips attacking migrants. We are seeing that apparently for no discernible reason, at least half of the people coming from Haiti are being sent away before their asylum claim is heard in the United States judicial system, which is illegal according to international law.
Seeking asylum is not illegal. Again, the same thing the Trump administration did. And then you have supporters of these awful policies, including, I wanted to mention one of the politicians we watch on this show that follows the horseshoe theory, Tulsi Gabbard, saying that this is the fault, the Republican talking point on this, the fault of Biden's open policy, open border policy. I mean, everyone just takes a situation and applies it to their preconceived notions. But no, there's no open border, and Biden is not respecting international law by allowing people to seek asylum.
This is a danger, right? Like, as you mentioned, the horseshoe. And again, like, I don't like the horseshoe theory. It shouldn't work. But when you're seeing the left in the Democratic caucus and when you're seeing the right of the Democratic caucus both having the same talking points, this is because of Joe Biden's open border policy. As in, like, tightening it up the border is gonna make it somehow more humane for the people that are coming over, when the solution should be to at least listen to their claims.
Is she gonna ask for the wall next? Like, is that what the we need a name for them? The ones that are supposedly left but end up being Tucker Carlson right. Are they gonna be asking for the wall next?
Just every socialist, did you leave them alone in a room for enough time?
I know, and I need to. Well, before I move on to something I really want to discuss, I also wanted to mention another Biden thing that's looking a lot like Trump. The General Assembly at the United Nations happened this week, and Biden showed up. Very nice words about diplomacy, but what he's really saying is the same thing Trump was saying. We are done getting involved in other countries' search for freedom, or to improve any other countries. We're done with nation building.
We're done with nation building.
It's the Trump foreign policy, but with nice words. He doesn't say Mexicans are rapists. Biden says nation building is over. We will now lead with diplomacy.
Bullshit.
At the end of the day, the facts and the actions are the same.
Bullshit. So, absolutely. And I was just reading this morning through a couple of samples in just the last 60, 70 years of possible examples of nation building done by the United States. And, recent memory, we have Panama. Wasn't that long ago. South Korea, Germany, Libya. I mean, there are good examples.
Libya's not a good one.
Well, but the United States got in there when they had to. They didn't build a country, but they sent troops when they had to. So it's not, and it's not that we consider that the United States should be the one policing the world, because ideally, in a perfect world, we don't want a world police. We want every country to be sovereign. But the fact of the matter is, once the big powers pull out of their role in the world and they're gonna leave a vacuum, because that's just inevitably what's gonna happen, the second and the third biggest powers in the world are gonna come fill it in. So instead of having democracy building like the United States was supposed to be doing, you're going to have authoritarian building like the Chinese and the Russian are currently doing. So this isolationist foreign policy...
And by the way, when we talk about intervention, what we mean is assisting freedom fighters already in all these countries because they exist. The US, this is the tanky lie that, the US goes in countries and just imposes certain rules, and they impose the idea that a regime should be overthrown. No, in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, there are people already fighting for that. They just need support.
We just need money. We just need money, training, and support. And it's not something that the United States hasn't done before. It's something the United States knows how to do, but you gotta follow through with it. And if you're just gonna say that your solution for Venezuela is to sanction the country indefinitely, which is just gonna hurt the average Venezuelan and not the regime, when you have the same position in Cuba, just going back to the embargo indefinitely, and while the Castros and Diaz Canals are making money.
Another way of following the Trump
Jesus Christ.
policy. I mean, who would have thought?
Jesus Christ.
But
I'm so mad. I'm so mad.
speaking of nation building, Edu, this is controversial, so I'm going to be very careful with it. But Israel is one of the countries the United States helped
Absolutely.
build.
100%.
Of course, it's a very delicate topic. I can say I am against settlement expansion, but I am for having a democracy in the region. I think that is a plus for the values that Western democracies represent. So I think the United States was right in helping a democracy develop in the area. I think one of the best ways the United States has done that is by funding of the Iron Dome. I mean, an amazing technology, defensive technology. I've seen it at work, actually. It's amazing. I was in Israel during the Gaza war of 2014. And this is basically how it goes. Hamas shoots a rocket from Gaza. The alarms go off in Israel. You have to go to a shelter while the Iron Dome does its work, which is basically it shoots another missile, but to intercept the one shot from Hamas. It's quite something to watch. You literally see it in the air the moment the two missiles come together and just eventually dissolve. So that's, by the way, a big reason activists for Palestine rights and freedom, which it's such a shame they overlap with this tanky far left that has overtaken their cause. So one of their arguments is, look at all the people that die in Palestine from Israeli force and compare it to the little deaths we see in Israel. Well, a big reason that's the case is the Iron Dome, because Hamas is trying to kill Israelis. Israelis just have the Iron Dome.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hot take, but we gotta be honest with it. The only reason why there are not more casualties on the side of Israel in this Israel and Palestine conflict, which I'm not taking sides in, by the way, the only reason why Israel has less casualties is because they have a very powerful defense system. That is all. If you see the footage of the Iron Dome in action, if you see each of those explosions that are going on in the air, if you consider them to be a missile that was going to be directed to civilians in Israel, you can really see the effect that this war has on both sides. So yes, I agree with you here. I believe that it is important for Israel to exist. I believe there is a reason for a democracy to exist in the region. I am not for settlement expansion, but what seems to be the foreign policy of the United States, for example, it's just to fund them and let them be.
Well, that's actually another thing, and we really don't want to get into this, but Biden has pulled away a lot from Israel. I mean, it was a big scandal that he didn't call the prime minister for like weeks after he became president, which is uncalled for a U.S. president, as that is one of our most important allies in the region. This is terrible, but I have to say it. I always say that the Iron Dome actually also works for Hamas because it gives them propaganda. Look how there's no Israeli deaths.
Look how powerful they are.
To kill.
Yeah.
Huh?
Look how powerful they are. We are unmatched. Yeah.
Exactly. But so the US Congress votes to fund this system every year. I don't know the details. I mean, it's a very expensive system. I don't know how it works technologically. But we have the squad doing their little show this week, as always. And you know what? I will say it. It's a racist show that they do because they are reactionary about certain peoples always. They are reactionary about anything having to do with Israel. They are reactionary against Cubans. They are reactionary against Syrians, about anyone that doesn't fit their preferred
Yeah.
narrative about the world. So this was just amazing. They were holding this bill hostage, the ones of always, who to me are just as dangerous as Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I don't care who gets mad that I say that, because I tweeted it and people were mad because they're like, well, the squad hasn't said Jews are bad in those words.
Well,
Just because someone is less smart about their populism doesn't mean that they're more dangerous. As a matter of fact, those who can hide who they really are and make it seem like they're all about human rights, they are more dangerous. So to me, the squad, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, are just as dangerous, and they are reactionary in their politics. So of course, they put up a show to not vote for funding of the Iron Dome. They voted no. But here's where it gets so yummy. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has such a problem because she wants to be a far left extremist, but she also wants to go to the Met Gala and be reelected and be a darling of the US media. So it's really difficult for her. So she wanted to vote no for the Iron Dome, as she is part of this far left, this reactionary far left
and
against Israel.
and then what happened here?
Well, first of all, they were lying all along. Rashida, all of them were acting as if we were funding bombs against Palestine. We're not even going to go into that. They were just lying. This is a system. Well, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a congresswoman from New York.
New York.
And in New York, you cannot be openly an anti-Semite and get elected for Congress. So she immediately, and the Jewish community is quite powerful in New York, and they are good at doing their lobbying. And they started doing, actually the New York Times had a very problematic take on this, because they were like saying basically that Jewish rabbis started, making a scandal that AOC was trying to vote no, and they started a campaign against her and making it sound like that's a bad thing. But I mean,
Isn't that what democracy is about? Like, isn't that the whole purpose of democracy, is that when politicians are making decisions that we don't like, we make a scandal about it so they change their mind?
Exactly. So just like she did her show crying at the border, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was forced to change her vote from no to present when it became obvious that this could be a career-ending move for her if she's a congresswoman for New York, not voting to fund the Iron Dome. So when she's casting her vote present, she starts crying and making a show. And then she literally tweets out her reasons for voting present instead of no. And I want to read a little bit of it, because in so many words, she's saying, yeah, I had to cool it on the anti-Semitism because I need to be reelected in New York. She said she cast a present vote because a no vote would risk a devolution of the good faith community fabric that allows us to join in a struggle for human rights and dignity everywhere. So many words.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Like, you put like 10 words there that doesn't mean anything.
That's such a Chavista move too, to like go around in circles to just say, I wanted to vote no, but my constituents don't want me to vote no.
I have to, like, I want to be anti-Semite, but I'm a congresswoman from New York, so sorry guys, I guess I'm present. And if I think you sent me one of her interviews when she was talking
I'm gonna
about.
put it here. Actually, I'm gonna edit it in. It's from 2018, but it just shows the reactionary way.
The cringe.
Yes, but I also think that what people are starting to see, at least in the occupation of Palestine, is just an increasing crisis of humanitarian condition. And that to me is just where I tend to come from on this issue.
You use the term the occupation of Palestine. What did you mean by that?
I think what I meant is like the settlements that are increasing in some of these areas and places where Palestinians are experiencing difficulty in access to their housing and homes.
Do you think you can expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd also I am not the expert on geopolitics on this issue.
And she never once mentions the word Israel on her answer. She just talks about the occupation of Palestine. So like that's like borderline Hamas kind of talking points. But
those terms matter. That's why we always say, the really dangerous populists aren't out here saying ugly words like Trump was, calling minorities rapists. No, they use what do you call it, dog whistles, and saying the occupation is a dog whistle.
And when a good journalist, like I believe the journalist who was having the interview with her was very good, when she catches that, is like, what do you mean the occupation of Palestine? Could you elaborate a little bit more? And seeing someone like AOC, which I don't like, I know her doesn't like, but to her credit, as a politician, she is very good because she's snappy, she's quick, she's passionate. This is the first time that I think I saw her completely disarmed by a journalist. She was dragging her words, she was shaking, she didn't know what to say, and then she came dragging it back. It's like, no, sorry. I meant that the problem is within the occupied territories of Palestine, but the new, the cities, the settlement expansion.
Once you call it the occupation, that encompasses more than just settlement expansion.
It's so much more, and obviously everyone that knows AOC and know what's hers about, we all know what she meant when she said the occupied Palestine territory and not the settlements. But it's just so funny to see her having to swallow her own words, her own mistakes. And it just serves to prove again that people in the far left are as discriminatory, as reactionary as people in the far right of the spectrum. So, no, pa'l baile, mamita.
Both the far right and the far left are anti-Semites.
No.
That's a fundamental
there's a fundamental part of far left and far right ideology on blaming everything on the Jews. It extends to blaming everything on Israel when it comes to foreign policy. So yes, caught red-handed, and now you had to eat your own words. Oh, I love this. I love when the bad people, bad things happen to bad people.
I want to point out that all of this shows us Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez is a living representation of the social and economic mobility that she says doesn't exist in this world. Because a congresswoman that can get an American that can get elected, that has such a basic, ignorant response to such an important question about our relationship with Israel, just shows you that anyone really can be elected in this country, just like Marjorie Taylor Greene was elected. It really is possible in this democracy. You can know nothing and become a congressperson. So is that good? Is that bad? I don't know, but it's democracy and it's the best thing we found.
It's what it is. It's the best thing we have to this date. So we're not about to change it, but we're about to tell you what's flawed with it, right? Anyway, I think we're gonna segue now into our interview. Could you please take it over from here?
Yes, so we're back this week with an interview, and we're going to be talking with journalist Michael Deibert, who's an expert on the situation in Haiti, and he's going to be telling us what the hell is provoking this horror scenes that we saw at the border this week. So let's do it. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us from the north.
Hi, Hermania. Thanks for having me on.
So this is really a topic that Edu and I do not know much about, much like I think most Americans somehow. So set the scene for me, Michael, because all of us clearly are paying attention to what's going on in Haiti right now because of the scenes we saw at the border this week. How did we get here? What are these migrants running from? We had in the news recently, we know that a president was assassinated. We know that there was an earthquake. We know that this is a nation that has struggled for decades. So what's going on, Michael?
I mean, I think to go back to the beginning a bit, Haiti in 1804, the people there defeated the French and they ended slavery at a moment when they were slave-owning states, including the United States, including Cuba and Puerto Rico and Brazil. And after that, there was a great deal of intense international pressure, obviously, because most of the world, most of the Western world at that time, viewed the idea of a bunch of slaves and free men of color defeating a European power as an existential threat to their whole philosophy of governance. And so, for many, many years and many decades after that, you had an incredible squeeze put on Haiti by these various powers, the United States, France, Britain, Spain, that kind of went on. And then it finally culminating in a 1915 to 1934 occupation by the United States of Haiti. And, since then, and following that, eventually was a 29-year family dictatorship of the Duvaliers, the father, Francois Papadoc, and the son, Jean-Claude Babydoc. When they were overthrown in 1986, I think, there was a real chance to refound the country. But unfortunately, I think a lot of the foreign powers viewed their logical allies in Haiti at that time, in the mid 1980s and late 1980s, not as the civil society that was trying to craft a constitution and trying to create a multi-party democracy, but the traditional, the military class, the political and economic elite that had always been there. And I think, a couple of years later in 1991, you had a coup that lasted until 94. And then, you've had ever since 94, basically, this tug of war between this left-wing anarcho-populist current, which was typified by Jean-Bertrand Aristide and the Lavalas Party, and this right-wing populist current, which was typified by Michel Martelly and Parti Haïtien Tech Calais, the PHTK, which was the party that Jovenel Moïse, the president who was murdered, was also a member of. I am a real opponent of populism in general, whether from the left or from the right. I always don't trust it, basically.
In this show,
So
we don't like populism. That's
yeah,
exactly what we're trying to
yeah.
fight.
So now you have a situation where the president was murdered at a time when Parliament had the terms of most of the parliamentarians had expired. And many were arguing that the president, in fact, was overstaying his term by 1 year. The person who's ostensibly running the country now is Ariel Henry, who was appointed, though not confirmed, as the prime minister before Jovenel was killed. So you have someone who's governing the country with almost no institutional legitimacy or legal legitimacy. To make matters more complicated, many people investigating and paying close attention to the murder investigation say that one of the main suspects was in regular communication with Henri on the night of the murder of the president,
Can you
which
tell us
obviously
a
makes it a
little
bit,
bit
yeah,
what's going on with that assassination? Because there was
yeah.
parts of it coming from Miami, Colombia, Venezuelan
Some
businessmen.
mercenaries
What?
involved there. Yeah, what's going on?
Yeah, it's a real serpentine kind of plot that has been revealed. And I think the fact of the matter is, you know, speaking to a lot of people, I mean, I speak to people in the Haitian police, I speak to people in the Haitian political system and otherwise. And I think the consensus of a lot of them was that among these Colombian mercenaries who were involved, maybe a handful of them knew what the mission really was. Like they knew they were there to kill the president, and the others were just kind of, the Praetorian Guard around them. And so, obviously, by the time they went into Jovenel's house in the morning and killed him, you have a bunch of guys standing outside, and they hear guns. And then they tried, crazily to hide in these popular neighborhoods, Quartier Populaire, like, kind of very crowded, very, struggling neighborhoods, as if a Colombian is not going to stand out in Haiti. I mean, come on. So, and they, a couple of them were killed. A couple of them are, quite a bunch of them are still in prison in Haiti. But I think the consensus is among most people I talk to is we still haven't really gotten to the intellectual and financial authors of the crime. Because a lot of the people that are in jail in Haiti now are kind of these little nobodies. And sure, it certainly seems like Dimitri Erard, who was the chief of security for the president, was involved in it. But he was not the guy who was funding it. I don't think anyone thinks that.
And
So
sorry, Michael. And who is running these investigations? Is the Haitian government the one taking care of that?
yeah, I mean the FBI went down briefly, but we haven't heard much about what they found since then. And I think, Haiti unfortunately has a history of impunity for these major crimes. I mean, when I started going to Haiti was in 1997, and then in April 2000, a guy called Jean Dominique, who was the most famous journalist in Haiti, was murdered. 9 people were indicted. 9 people, all with links to Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the former president, were indicted for the crime, and none of them ever went to prison. One of them, at last I checked, was living free in Florida, outside of Miami. She's a former Haitian senator, and that goes on and on and on. And that you have a structural and systemic problem with impunity in Haiti that is bigger than any one politician or one party. Now, going
It
fast
seems
forwarding to
like the
today,
US like allows it in a way if we have people who are accused of being involved in assassinations living in Florida.
yeah, and I think a lot of people in Haiti would say now that the U.S. government has really given a blank check to PHTK, the ruling party, some of whose members of which are accused of everything ranging from major drug trafficking to murder. And you see the same thing with PHTK these days, which is what you saw with Lavalas in the early 2000s, which is that it almost seems like for a lot of people involved with the party that criminal entrepreneurial enterprise is as important as the political aspect of it. Now, fast forwarding to today, why are all these Haitians showing up at the border all of a sudden? So, it appears, I mean, I had been following leaving Colombia, leaving Chile. A lot of them had been living there since the earthquake in 2010, and they were gradually moving through South America, crossing the Darien Gap on foot between Colombia
In
and
Panama.
Panama, which I can't even imagine
That's
doing. Like, I
insane.
mean,
Is that possible? Like,
I mean, it's possible, but I mean, it's extremely dangerous. I mean, you have all kinds of paramilitaries there. You have dissident members of like the ELN, of the FARC
mhm.
there, narcos of various kinds.
And just the
But
terrain in
so
general.
yeah. And so they arrive, a lot of these people have been arriving in southern Mexico and Chiapas, where they're being horribly abused by the immigration authorities and the Guardia Nacional that Lopez Obrador, the president of Mexico, created, who is another populist, a nightmare, in my opinion.
That is
And
another
they,
aspect of this, Michael, I had forgotten about, but I have seen you tweeting about it, how the Mexican
yeah,
government is treating these migrants because,
yeah,
we like to mention it all on this show. So, yeah, we can
yeah,
talk about what the US does, but it's not
yeah,
just the US. What is
yeah,
Andres Manuel, who's supposedly a progressive, what
yeah.
has he been doing to Haitian migrants?
People have been in Chiapas for now, months and months and months, waiting just for a hearing, regularize their status. Can they go forward? And so they've started moving forward on foot. And me, I spent a number of years reporting on the drug war in Mexico. I wrote a book that was a history of the Cartel de Golfo, which was the oldest criminal organization in Mexico. And the thought of, the fact that these people are living in these camps in Matamoros, in Ciudad Acuña, and places like that, completely unprotected, out in the open. I mean, I reported from some of those places, and I was, I felt extremely unsafe in a car driving around doing interviews strategically. So I can imagine living in the wild kind of out there. And now, you see these horrible images of these immigration agents in the States, which did, I mean, they call nothing more to mind than, you know, um, than the way slaves were treated. I mean, you have these white and Latino guys, because a lot of those border agents are Mexican American too, whipping black uh, people who are so desperate. So okay, maybe on one level that is not Biden's doing. Maybe Biden's not controlling the way they're acting, but what he is controlling is the summary deportation of Haitians to Haiti.
Well, their
Uh, you know,
response to this was, we have banned the border patrol going on horseback.
yeah, yeah, and I mean it's really something awful. And today, to give you an idea how shaky the vetting process is of who they are deporting, Le Nouveliste, which is Haiti's main newspaper, today ran an article about how they had deported an Angolan to Haiti. Some
Jesus
guy who had never been
Christ.
to Haiti before because they thought he was Haitian. And it's like the guy, number one, Angolans don't look anything like Haitians. Haitians look like they may be from Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, or Togo or something. And number one, the guy doesn't speak Creole or French. So
Jeez.
yeah, I can only imagine all the people who were swept up in that and sent back to Haiti. And the thing that's really frustrating to those of us who voted for Biden, I think, is, there is a legal right to apply for asylum in the United States, no matter how you get here. There is a legal right to apply for asylum. And that should preclude these kind of summary deportation expulsions, which is what we saw under Trump. And I think a
Well,
lot of us hope that would end.
to kind of like go back a little bit in the whole history, U.S. Haiti kind of relationships. If I'm not mistaken, it was under Trump, maybe his last year or 2019. I'm not sure that he got rid of the TPS for Haitians in the United States. So what has we have a new president, Joe Biden, who campaigned very hard on immigration, on more humane immigration or a more humane border. What has changed for people from Haiti being treated as they're trying to come into the United States from Trump to Biden?
I think, a lot of people outside of Haiti and in Haiti today see the Biden administration supporting the same corrupt political machine in Haiti that's making people flee that Trump did. And I mean, as a matter of fact, the Biden's lead negotiator for Haiti, Daniel Foote, resigned this week in protest against both the policy at the border, but also significantly, he said, I mean, I'm paraphrasing him, but basically, look, we're continuing with the same failed policy of supporting these same failed elites. And this is a guy who's a career diplomat. He's not some crazy left-wing activist or something like that. So for him to do that, it's you must know things are pretty bad.
Talking about the border, along with Haitians, we are seeing Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and Cubans in the Mexico-US border.
Yeah. Yeah, and it should be self-evident, I think, to Americans who talk about these countries, the desperation that would push someone to travel through the Mexico that is completely controlled by criminal gangs. I mean, the state completely has no control of arms anywhere in the country. And, but somehow that seems to sometimes fall on deaf ears. And I mean, as someone who travels around Latin America reporting, I meet Venezuelans all over Latin America who are one of my cab drivers in San Juan, Puerto Rico was a scientist, who was like 60 years old and finally couldn't take it anymore and left Venezuela. And I think
It
it
breaks
was
my heart.
2012.
I don't know if you
Yeah.
saw the scenes. Again, of course, we're living in the US, in the North, we have to call it out. But these scenes of xenophobia happen all around the world. Today, we saw
In Chile.
heartbreak. Oh my God. In Chile, there was an anti-migrant protest and they burned the things of
Not
the
not
Venezuelan refugees.
not only the things, but like they specifically targeted like their documents. And if you ever talk to a Venezuelan, if you ever met a Venezuelan, you know how hard it is for us to get a passport, to get like something that says we exist. So that's heartbreaking.
So, Michael, why is the story of Bolsonaro sexier for the first world than the story of what Maduro is doing in Venezuela? I mean, I think a good comparison. Maduro went to the UN National Assembly a few years ago. He was welcomed by everyone. He went to a Harlem church. BLM welcomed him, and it was all okay. Meanwhile, Bolsonaro went, rightfully okay. No one accepted him. But why don't they treat left-wing authoritarians the same way?
Well, and the strange thing is, in that juxtaposition, of course, is that, I mean, Bolsonaro is a completely repellent figure on every level. But unlike Maduro, he was actually elected. I mean, Bolsonaro was, to the discredit of the Brazilian voters, was elected in a fair contest there. Maduro has been an illegitimate leader of Venezuela for years.
I'm like you said it because I don't want to be called right wing, but I mean, facts are facts.
The facts are the
No,
facts.
I mean if it came, I don't like Lula one bit, but if it came to voting between him and Bolsonaro, I'd vote for Lula because I think
We've been
Bolsonaro
struggling with that decision too. So this brings me, Michael, to the general idea of this episode. Obviously, we had to vote for Biden. Our democracy was in danger. There was no question for most, nuanced people. But as we do, being journalists and critics of everything and Twitter shit posters, Biden is doing a lot of things similarly to Trump. In Afghanistan, he followed the Trump plan. He doesn't like to talk to the press. in the border. We're seeing horror scenes. So what's going on here? And how should we take it? Is it just a bad summer that Biden had? Should we be concerned? What's going on in the Biden administration?
I mean, I think another thing that is also continuing from the Trump administration is this incredibly draconian collective punishment of people in Cuba.
Hmm.
I mean, the measures that Trump put in place are squeezing the average Cuban, not the elite. I mean, because the elite have their own corrupt systems of getting money out of it. So what I've unfortunately kind of come to the conclusion of so far this summer, and as well, surrendering Afghanistan to the Taliban. I have some dear Afghan friends, and it's just absolutely heart-wrenching to go back to this medieval, completely like, not Islamic. That's just they dress that up in their own prejudices.
But
Nowhere in,
if we say leaving Afghanistan in that way, you start getting called pro-war. Why do you love war so much? And I mean, you
yeah.
particularly, Michael, are pretty progressive. So the fact that you also were loud about the mistake that this was, I thought was remarkable.
Well, I mean, everybody I know who's spent time in Afghanistan, whose opinion I respect, and I know quite a few people who have lived there for years and Afghans as well. I mean, the idea that somehow there was no choice between, eternally being in Afghanistan at a, 10 on the scale war, or just leaving and abandoning the country to these completely medieval terrorists, that's a that's a false choice, I think. I mean, we had, what was it, 2,500 troops or something like that
Yeah.
towards the end there. And, universities were open. Women were not erased from society. There was a thriving civil society. There was a free press. And not saying that the U.S. committed a lot of crimes in Afghanistan. They committed a lot of crimes in Iraq, and that's something that Americans should face, but they don't have to, because in their mind, I think these wars are so far away. But the U.S. certainly committed massacres in various parts of Afghanistan.
Including
And
when we were leaving, when the Biden administration was a success, we
yeah,
killed a bunch of little kids.
And
yeah.
no, no,
So
no, no. Actually, ISIS targets were killed during that bombings. Only civilians.
yeah,
So.
yeah, and so this idea that somehow it's very strange. I mean, this dichotomy of, with this very light presence in Afghanistan, we were preventing this catastrophe from happening. But a lot of the same people who criticize that light presence are people who will twist themselves into moral knots defending, the extended use of torture and murder by Maduro, for example, or Assad or Ortega. And, I mean, the amount of Nicaraguans who have fled to Costa Rica in the last 3 years, I mean, tens of thousands easily. And, that,
And Ortega is now committing assassination attempts of
yeah.
opponents in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like what Pinochet used to do I mean, we just passed the anniversary of the bombing that Pinochet did in DC, where he
Hmm.
killed the former U.S. ambassador, the former Chilean ambassador to the U.S. And I mean, that's what you're seeing in Nicaragua right now. And I think, I'd be interested to hear your guys' opinion, because most of the Venezuelans I know, I mean, when they watch these talks in Mexico, are just completely, beside themselves, because they feel that it's simply the Venezuelan opposition trying to get a piece of the cake and throwing the people under the bus, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what we think, word by word. It's essentially that's what it is. The Venezuelan opposition hasn't really represented anyone but themselves for the last
Yeah.
10 years or so. Even when we
People
give
don't
them
like it
votes,
when I say this, but we don't get to choose them either. They have their own little authoritarian movement because who voted for them?
and by accepting to participate in these coming elections, we just can only assume them as to be part of the regime's machinery of simulating elections.
Yeah.
But Michael, I have a question for you, kind of like bringing everything together that we discussed. So, in particular with the geopolitics. So, I see my perspective as a Venezuelan refugee living in Canada, so just tangentially related to the United States, is that both the Republicans and the Democrats in general seem to think very alike when it comes to foreign policy, in the sense that let's, take back interventionism and just push diplomacy. Let's just try to make everything diplomatic. And obviously, it's not something that's been working. Afghanistan is the prime example. As we were talking, as Herman and I talk a lot, as soon as the US leaves China, it's already making deals with the Taliban, right? So if the United States, if both parties seems to be on this same boat of, let's
No more nation building.
no
That's
more
what Biden
nation
said at the
building,
United Nations.
no more nation building, no more interventionism, no more sending troops abroad. It seems to me that if the United States leaves that vacuum, the only logical conclusion is that someone else is going to come and fill it up.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the case. And I mean, if you look at the example of, we've had troops in Western Europe since 1945. Well, earlier than 1945, actually. We've had troops in Japan, South Korea. And it's not this idea that you have to be at war, talking about invading countries or something like that. I mean, but there is an idea of having some sort of multilateral, collaborative relationship with other governments to protect shared values. And I think the idea that somehow, Russia's just going to sit back, that China's just going to sit back and not fill that vacuum, I think is a mistake. I mean, interestingly, my friends who observe Asia have been really happy with Biden there. They think he's been doing really, really good in terms of pushing back against China. That's not any sort of area of my expertise, so I can't really have an informed opinion
It
on it.
does seem like Biden is focused on Asia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once again, no American president cares about Latin America, but meanwhile, China, Iran, and Russia are making friends all over the region. So
Yeah. Well, and also another something that doesn't really get talked about very much in the U.S. media is the intense entrance into Africa that Russia has done in the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, they're all over. They're in Chad. They're in the Central African Republic. With all of these mercenaries. I mean, the Wagner Group, which is this kind of umbrella mercenaries that has strong ties to the Kremlin. I mean, a lot of people think it's basically just the Kremlin front. They have been committing crimes in various countries in West and Central Africa. And so that, to somebody, I mean, one of the countries I focus on is the Democratic Republic of Congo. So to see, Russia going in there is pretty disturbing. Although, the U.S. made lots of mistakes there too. But at least, I think Biden seems to be focusing on China rather on Asia and a lot of the rest of the world.
It sounds like with this perfect equilibrium between these gangs and the economic interests and the political interests, it seems that internally, at least, there is no way out of this Haitian crisis for the Haitian people. So what is the role that other democracies in the region, not only the United States, but I'm going to put all the Organization of American States on the table.
We now have other freedom fighters in the region, the president of Uruguay, Paraguay, we stand. So
what is the role that they need to play?
I'll answer that question. This is completely off the topic, but if you've ever been to Uruguay, I think it's like one of the paradises in the world.
Oh,
I visited there, and I mean, people look Brazilian, yet they speak Argentine Spanish. You have beer. You have beaches. You have wine. You have
best meat.
My dad grew up in Argentina, actually, so I grew up having asado. So that's in my heart. But what I've suggested about Haiti for years is basically this: at the end of the civil war in Guatemala that went on for 30 years, one of the things that was written into the peace agreements was the formation of this UN-backed commission. Its acronym is CICIG, the Commission Against Corruption and Impunity in Guatemala, that was responsible for prosecuting corruption and investigating the links of illegal armed actors to the state and to politicians. That commission was incredibly successful, up to and including jailing a sitting president, Otto Perez Molina, when he was in office. And Trump, of course, made common cause with Guatemalan criminal monarchy to disband it. So it was disbanded like 2 years ago. What was really disturbing to me is when, I don't know if you remember when Kamala Harris went to Guatemala City and said, "Don't come," told the refugees. Yes. She was literally surrounded by the worst of the criminal monarchy in Guatemala on that stage, including the current president, who was jailed for his alleged role in a prison massacre a couple years ago. So what Haiti needs, I think, is something analogous to that commission. It needs a commission because Haiti, the amount of bloodshed in Haiti is every bit as bad as any declared civil war that I've ever and you need an entity with foreign support that can help the honest actors in Haitian society rebuild the country and hold the criminals currently purging it accountable. Now, this isn't something that would be imposed, by the outside. It would be something that would be a Haitian created and led entity that would have support from the outside. I mean, the UN has had, multiple peacekeeping missions in Haiti over the years, and that did not change this systemic and structural problem. So it's not just a question of having a lot of guys with guns around. The Haitians, I think, would love to start seeing some of the people that they know are criminal, that they know are corrupt, who have been that way for years, going to jail. They do. Because now in Haiti, if you have the right connections, you can rob as much money as you want, you can kill anybody, and you don't have anything to fear, basically. And that's what needs to change.
Right. And in this show, we always talk about why isolationists should care about what's going on in these countries. Well, people like to, act progressive and be heartbroken over these scenes at the border that we saw, but then they don't relate that with their isolationist policies of, oh, we don't
Yeah,
have to take care of the world, but I just don't want to see it on my borders.
yeah.
You will see it just like you're seeing Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and Cubans. So if
And
people think
one thing I wanted to mention, actually, in terms of what I think is like the debt the U.S. has to Haiti. In the mid 90s, I mean, two of the things that really destroyed the Haitian economy both happened under the tenure of Bill Clinton. One of which was we imposed a completely crippling economic embargo on the country in the mid 90s to help try to return Aristide to power, which basically destroyed the middle class of Haiti, destroyed it. And then after Aristide returned, there was a World Bank and IMF structural adjustment program, which Clinton supported, which lowered the tariff on imported rice to 3%. It had originally been at like 30 or 35%. So what happened then is you had all of this rice, especially from Arkansas, uh, flooding into Haiti, and the peasant farmers could not compete with it. So you had all of these people who had been kind of subsistence farmers making a little money selling rice. Uh, they could no longer support themselves, and all of these families flooded into, especially Port-au-Prince, where their kids then provided an inexhaustible supply of recruits for these armed groups. So I think that is by supporting the creation of a commission, something like this is one way the U.S. could maybe, make some amends for its past misdeeds.
But just to close off, Michael, you have more experience than us watching all of these issues in the region and in the United States. Edu and I are freaking out. Like we said, it seems that authoritarianism is rising, populism is rising. Meanwhile, democracies and their friends are just going down. So, what's next for the United States? Biden, like we said, is not being the Angela Merkel we needed him to be. So what's next? I mean, it's already about to be 2022, 2024 is in no time. Is Trumpism going to return? What is going to replace Biden, and is it going to be better for geopolitics?
Unfortunately, what I've been seeing is at the state level, the now completely MAGA state GOP parties have spent the time since the election kicking roadblocks out of the way to steal the presidential election in 2024. And I mean, these handful of Republican officials who saved the election basically
Yeah.
in 2020, they're going to be gone. They're going to be gone, and they're going to be replaced by acolytes. And you have people who just it's really crazy to talk to these white people in the States who really do believe, rural white America, that's that's the majority. The country hasn't changed since the 1950s. It's the same demographic strata, etc. And that people don't think like they do. And I'm a guy, a white working class guy in Pennsylvania. In a lot of ways, I would be Trump's demographic, except I traveled and I had a different kind of familial history than a lot of people I grew up with. But yeah, I mean, this poison has gotten into the psychology of so many people in the States. The way I saw it happen in Haiti, and the way I saw, people about it happening in Venezuela. I mean, it's not logical. I mean, I remember the first time I heard Chavez speak, I was in a hotel room in El Salvador, and he came on like they were broadcasting one of his speeches. And my reaction was, I can't believe people are taken in by this guy. This seems like such bullshit. Like, how can they be? I have the same reaction to Trump. I mean, as a guy who grew up in the strata of kind of working class Pennsylvania, to me, this billionaire from New York City, that's the guy you see yourself in. It doesn't make any sense to me. Because he seems like the guy you would hate, I would
Right.
think.
But
But
don't you
it's
think, Michael, also there is a problem? Of course, the Republican Party went to hell, but also the Democratic Party is not offering a good alternative and it stopped being the party of the working people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Democrats, one of their big problems is that among the progressive wing, they do not, or they claim not to recognize, like, okay, I have my criticisms of Biden, but there's no comparison to me between the threat Biden, threat Trump, and Trump is imposed. I mean, and the fact that somehow with some progressives there's an they think there's an equivalence between Biden and Trump shows how that they are. And it's like if all you do is like listen to start a brownstone socialist left-wing podcast from Brooklyn,
Chapo
you're going
Trap
to have a very
House.
strange yeah you're going to have a very strange idea of how this country works and how people think. I think, and it's strange, looking at Pennsylvania, especially because we used to have an extremely moderate Republican Party, like Arlen Specter, Tom Ridge, John Hines, people like that, who kind of were, strong defense, low taxes, never really talked about religion very much at all. Probably would think, they had this kind of Northeastern Yankee reserve, thought it would be kind of in bad taste to talk about religion or something. And now it's crazies who think that Q and Alan is going to kind of reveal themselves and set everything right. So if it can happen to this state Republican Party, I think it can happen to any.
Well, I'm glad I already had to run from one country. Let's hope
Yeah.
we can keep this one. But thank you so much, Michael, for
Thank
your
you.
time. This conversation
Hey,
was illuminating.
thank you so much, guys. I was really glad to talk to you.